The sound of his boots echoed through the empty streets as Jake walked carefully through what used to be a beautiful city. 3 months ago, this place was full of life and strange, wonderful buildings that looked like they were made of colored glass. Now, everything was broken and quiet. Jake had been a soldier for 8 years. But this war felt different. Fighting other humans was one thing, but fighting beings from another world, that was something no training could prepare you for. His team had been sent here to check if any enemies were hiding in the ruins. It was supposed to be a simple job. Go in, look around, report back. Nothing complicated. But as Jake walked through the shattered remains of what looked like a marketplace, he heard something that made his heart skip a beat. It was soft and barely there, but unmistakable. Someone was crying, and it sounded like a child. Jake stopped walking and listened carefully. The sound was coming from somewhere ahead, maybe from inside one of the collapsed buildings. His training told him to call his team immediately. This could be a trap. The aliens were smart, and they knew humans had soft spots for children. But something about this crying felt real. Too real to be fake. He followed the sound, stepping carefully over broken pieces of what looked like crystal furniture. The buildings here were unlike anything on Earth, even destroyed. They still caught the light in amazing ways, throwing rainbow patterns on the walls. Jake had never seen anything so beautiful, even in ruins. The crying got louder as he moved deeper into the building. Finally, in what might have been a small room, he found the source of the sound. Hidden under a pile of glittering debris was a small figure, curled up in a ball and shaking. Jake's breath caught in his throat. It was a child, but not a human child. Her skin had a soft, pearl-like glow, and she was smaller than any 7-year-old he knew back home. Her hair was silver and seemed to move on its own, like it was floating in water. But what got to him most were her eyes. They were large and violet, filled with tears that sparkled like tiny diamonds as they fell. For a moment, they just stared at each other. The little girl stopped crying, probably as surprised to see him as he was to see her. Jake knew he should be afraid. This was the enemy, but all he could see was a scared, lost child who needed help. Slowly, Jake took off his helmet and set it down on the ground. He wanted her to see his face, to know he wasn't just another scary soldier. He had a daughter back home, about the same age as this little one. The thought of his own child being lost and afraid in a destroyed city made his chest tight. "Hey, there," Jake said softly, the way he talked to his daughter when she had nightmares. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." The child didn't understand his words, but something in his voice must have sounded safe. She stopped shaking and looked at him with those incredible eyes. Jake smiled and held out his hand, palm up, showing he had no weapons. The little girl hesitated for a long moment. Then, very slowly, she reached out with her own hand. Jake noticed she had 3 fingers instead of 5, but her touch was warm and surprisingly human-like when their hands met. Something passed between them, not words, but understanding, too. Beings from different worlds, but both knowing what it meant to be scared and alone. The child started speaking then, in a voice like soft music. Jake couldn't understand the language, but he recognized the desperate tone. She kept pointing deeper into the ruins and saying the same word over and over, Miraka, Miraka. Jake didn't need a translator to know what that meant. In any language, anywhere in the universe, that sound meant the same thing. Mama. This little girl was looking for her mother. His heart broke for her. Jake thought about his own daughter, safe at home with her mom. What would he do if she was lost in a war zone, calling for him? What would any parent do? The child tugged on his hand, trying to pull him toward the back of the building. She kept saying Miraka and looking at him with eyes full of hope. She thought he could help her find her mother. The trust in her face made Jake feel like a giant. This little being, who should have been terrified of him, was asking for his help. Jake looked around the destroyed room. His team would be wondering where he was soon. He was supposed to report any alien contact immediately. Command would want to know about this child. She could be valuable, they would say. Information about alien families, their hiding places, their weaknesses. But looking at her small, hopeful face, Jake couldn't think of her as valuable information. She was just a lost child who missed her mom. And somehow, without planning it, without thinking about the consequences, Jake made a decision that would change everything. He squeezed her small hand gently and nodded toward the back of the building. "Okay, little one," he whispered. "Let's go find your mama." The child's face lit up with the first smile he'd seen since finding her. It was like watching the sun come out after a storm. She stood up carefully, brushing sparkly dust off her clothes, and held his hand tightly as they began to walk deeper into the ruins. Jake knew he was probably making the biggest mistake of his military career. But as he felt the small, trusting hand in his, he also knew it was the right thing to do. Sometimes being human meant more than following orders. Sometimes it meant helping a scared child find her way home, no matter what world she came from. 2 days had passed since Jake found the little alien girl, and he was living a double life that was eating him alive. During the day, he went on patrol with his team, acting like nothing had changed, but every spare moment, he snuck away to the old supply bunker where he had hidden her. The bunker was perfect for hiding someone. It was underground, forgotten by both sides in the war, and had enough supplies to last for weeks. Jake had cleared out a small corner, making it as comfortable as possible with old blankets and cushions he found scattered around the base. It wasn't much, but it was safe. The little girl had been scared at first, not understanding why Jake kept leaving and coming back. But children adapt quickly, even alien children. She seemed to understand that he was protecting her, keeping her secret from the other soldiers who might not be as kind. Jake had started calling her Luna because her skin glowed softly like moonlight in the dark bunker. She seemed to like the name, even though she couldn't say it properly. When she tried to repeat it, it came out sounding like music, all soft tones and gentle sounds. But the real breakthrough came when Jake found a damaged translation device in the ruins. It was military equipment, designed to help soldiers communicate with captured aliens. Jake felt guilty using it, but he needed to understand what Luna was trying to tell him. The first time the device worked, Luna's eyes went wide with excitement. She grabbed Jake's hands and started talking rapidly, her musical voice filling the small bunker. The translator was old and broken, only catching every few words. But what Jake heard made his blood run cold. Mother, Queen, missing, scared. The words came through in pieces, but Jake started to understand the horrible truth. This wasn't just any lost child. Luna kept saying a name that the translator couldn't quite capture, something that sounded like Thar or something. But when she drew pictures in the dust on the bunker floor, Jake's worst fears were confirmed. The drawings were simple, like any child would make, but they told a clear story. A tall, beautiful woman with a crown of lights. Luna pointing to the woman and saying Marika over and over. Then Luna drawing herself next to the crown woman, both of them smiling. Jake's hand shook as he realized what he was looking at. Queen Tharmor, the alien leader his people had been hunting for months. The one they blamed for starting this whole war. The one command had put a massive bounty on. And this little girl, this sweet, innocent child he had been protecting, was her daughter. The weight of this knowledge nearly crushed him. Jake sat in the bunker, watching Luna hum softly to herself while she played with some shiny rocks she had collected, and felt like the world was spinning out of control. He was harboring the enemy's child. If anyone found out, he would be court-martialed at best. At worst, they might think he was a traitor working with the aliens. But it got worse. As the days passed, Luna started getting sick. At first, Jake thought it was just stress or fear, but then her skin began to lose its glow. She stopped eating the rations he brought her, and she slept most of the time. When she was awake, she called weakly for her mother, her voice getting smaller and sadder each day. Jake didn't know anything about alien medicine, but he could see she was fading. Whatever was wrong with her, she needed more help than he could give. She needed her mother. The thought of losing Luna terrified him in a way that surprised him. In just a few days, this little alien girl had wormed her way into his heart. When she smiled at him, it reminded him of his own daughter back home. When she was scared, he wanted to protect her from everything bad in the universe. When she tried to teach him words in her language, laughing when he got them wrong, he felt like maybe there was hope for peace between their peoples. But now Luna was dying, and Jake faced an impossible choice. He could turn her over to his commanding officers. They would be thrilled to have the alien queen's daughter. She would be valuable beyond measure, a bargaining chip that could end the war. Command would probably give him a medal for capturing such an important prisoner. The thought made him sick. Luna wasn't a prisoner or a bargaining chip. She was a child who missed her mom and just wanted to go home. The idea of his own people using her, maybe hurting her to get information about her mother, made Jake want to punch something. But what was the alternative? Luna was getting sicker every day. Soon, she would be too weak to travel. If Jake waited much longer, she might die in that bunker. Alone and far from the mother she kept calling for, there was only one other option, and it was completely insane. Jake could try to find Queen Tharmor himself. He could take Luna back to her mother, even though that mother was technically his enemy. Even though it would mean crossing into alien territory where he would probably be killed on sight. Even though it went against everything he had been trained to do as a soldier. Jake looked at Luna, who was barely conscious now, her skin so dim he could hardly see her in the dark bunker. She opened her violet eyes and looked at him with complete trust, the way his own daughter looked at him when she was sick and needed him to make everything better. "Miraka," Luna whispered, so softly Jake almost didn't hear her. "Please, Miraka." In that moment, Jake made his decision. He didn't care about the war anymore. He didn't care about following orders or doing what was expected of him. All he cared about was getting this little girl back to her mother before it was too late. He gently picked up Luna, wrapping her in the softest blanket he could find. She was so light, so fragile in his arms. "Don't worry, little one," he whispered, even though she probably couldn't understand him. "We're going to find your mama. I promise." As Jake prepared to leave the bunker for what might be the last time, he knew he was about to embark on the most dangerous mission of his life. But looking down at Luna's peaceful face as she slept in his arms, he also knew it was the most important thing he would ever do. Some things mattered more than orders. Some things mattered more than war. And sometimes, being human meant risking everything to keep a promise to a dying child. Jake had never felt so alone in his entire life. He was walking through a wasteland that stretched for miles, carrying Luna in a makeshift carrier he had fashioned from his military backpack. The little girl was getting weaker by the hour, and Jake was starting to wonder if he had made a terrible mistake. It had been 3 days since they left the bunker, and the journey was nothing like Jake had imagined. The alien world was beautiful but deadly. During the day, the temperature rose so high that Jake had to find shelter in caves, or under the strange metallic trees that grew in twisted spirals. At night, it got so cold that his breath turned to ice, and he had to wrap Luna in every piece of clothing he could spare. But the weather was the least of their problems. This was a war zone, and both human and alien patrols were everywhere. Jake had already had to close calls with his own people. The first time, he had hidden behind some rocks while a helicopter flew overhead, its searchlight sweeping the ground just yards from where he crouched with Luna. The second time, he had spotted a group of human soldiers in the distance and had to crawl on his belly for half a mile to avoid them. The alien patrols were even scarier. Jake had seen them from far away, tall figures that seemed to glide rather than walk, their weapons glowing with an eerie blue light. He knew that if they caught him with Luna, they might think he had kidnapped her. They might shoot first and ask questions later. Luna tried to help by giving him directions, but she was so weak that her words came out as whispers. The translator was running out of power, only working for a few minutes at a time. When it did work, Luna would point toward a mountain range in the distance and say something that sounded like home. Song place. Jake didn't understand what she meant until the third night, when they were both exhausted and nearly frozen. Luna had been unconscious for hours, and Jake was starting to panic. Her skin was barely glowing anymore, and her breathing was so shallow he had to put his ear to her chest. to make sure she was still alive. Then, just as Jake was beginning to lose hope, Luna's eyes suddenly opened wide. She sat up in his arms, with more energy than she had shown in days, pointing excitedly toward the mountains ahead. "Home song," she whispered, her voice filled with joy. Jake looked where she was pointing and gasped. The mountains weren't just mountains. They were made of crystal, towering spires that caught the moonlight and reflected it in every direction. And from somewhere among those crystal peaks came the most beautiful sound Jake had ever heard. It was like music, but not quite. More like singing, but not exactly that either. The sound seemed to come from the mountains themselves, a deep, haunting melody that made Jake's chest feel tight with emotion. Even though he didn't understand it, the music made him think of home, of safety, of being loved and protected. Luna was humming along with the distant song, her voice getting stronger with each note. The closer they got to the crystal mountains, the brighter her skin became. It was like the music was healing her, bringing her back to life. Jake realized this must be how alien families found each other. The home song Luna kept talking about wasn't just music. It was a beacon, a way for lost children to find their way back to their parents. As they climbed higher into the mountains, Jake began to see signs of alien civilization. The paths were smoother here, carved from the same crystal. As the mountains themselves, strange plants grew along the walkways, their leaves glowing softly in different colors. Everything was beautiful, but Jake felt more nervous with each step. What would happen when they reached the alien stronghold? Would the guards see him as an enemy and attack immediately? Would they think he was trying to harm Luna? Jake had no plan beyond getting Luna home to her mother. After that, he would probably be captured or worse. But seeing Luna getting stronger as they climbed higher, Jake knew he had made the right choice. Near dawn, as they rounded a bend in the crystal path, Jake saw something that made his heart stop. Guards, dozens of them. Tall alien figures in flowing robes that seemed to shift color like oil on water. Their faces were hidden behind masks that looked like stylized suns, and they carried weapons that hummed with deadly energy. Jake's first instinct was to run, but he was exhausted and Luna was still too weak to walk on her own. There was nowhere to go anyway. The guards had already seen them, but instead of attacking, something amazing happened. The guards began talking rapidly among themselves in their musical language. Jake heard Luna's name repeated several times, along with words that sounded urgent but not angry. Then one of the guards removed his mask, revealing a face that was both alien and surprisingly kind. The guard spoke directly to Luna, who responded weakly but with obvious relief. Jake didn't need the translator to understand what was happening. These weren't enemy soldiers preparing to capture a human intruder. These were people who had been searching for their lost princess for months. The guard looked at Jake with eyes that held surprise, confusion, and something that might have been gratitude. He spoke slowly, in broken English that was clearly difficult. "For him, you bring a small one home?" Jake nodded, not trusting his voice. The guard studied him for a long moment, then did something that shocked Jake to his core. He bowed deeply, a gesture of respect that Jake knew he didn't deserve. "Queen, she waits." The guard said simply, "She waits a very long time." As the guards formed a protective circle around them, Jake felt a mixture of relief and terror. They had made it. Luna was home. But now came the hardest part of all. In a few minutes, Jake would come face to face with Queen Tharmor, the alien leader his people had been trying to capture or destroy for months. Luna stirred in his arms and looked up at him with those incredible violet eyes. She smiled weakly and touched his face with her small hand. "Thank you," she whispered in perfect English, words she must have learned from the translator. "Thank you for bringing me to America." Jake's eyes filled with tears as they walked through the crystal gates of the alien fortress. Whatever happened next, he had kept his promise. He had brought a little girl home to her mother, and sometimes that was all that mattered in the universe. Jake had imagined this moment 100 times during their journey, but nothing could have prepared him for the reality of standing before Queen Tharmor. The guards had led them through corridors that seemed to be carved from living light. their walls pulsing with soft colors that reminded Jake of the northern lights back on Earth. When they finally reached the Queen's chambers, Jake expected to see a throne room or some kind of formal meeting hall. Instead, he found himself in what looked like a garden, but one unlike anything he had ever seen. The ceiling was made of transparent crystal, showing the star-filled sky above. Strange plants grew everywhere, their leaves glowing in gentle pastels, and a small stream of liquid silver ran through the center of the room. But Jake barely noticed the beautiful surroundings, because all his attention was focused on the figure standing at the far end of the garden. Queen Tharmor was tall, even by alien standards, with skin that shimmered like pearl and hair that moved as if it were underwater. She wore robes that seemed to be made of starlight itself, shifting between deep blues and purples with every movement. On her head was a crown that wasn't really a crown at all, but a collection of tiny lights that orbited around her like miniature planets. For a moment, Jake just stared. This was the enemy leader he had been taught to hate and fear, the one responsible for the war that had taken him away from his own family. But as he looked at her face, all he could see was a mother who had lost her child. Queen Tharmor's eyes were the same violet color as Luna's, but they were filled with a sadness so deep it made Jake's chest ache. She stood perfectly still, like a statue, as if she was afraid that moving might make this moment disappear. Her hands were pressed against her heart, and Jake could see them trembling. Then Luna stirred in his arms and made a soft sound. The Queen's composure shattered instantly. She fell to her knees right there in the garden, not caring that her beautiful robes were touching the ground. Tears began streaming down her face as she held out her arms toward her daughter, Lunica. She whispered, using what must have been Luna's real name in their language. "My little starlight, my precious one." Jake carefully walked forward and gently placed Luna in her mother's arms. The reunion was so powerful it made his own eyes fill with tears. Queen Tharmor cradled her daughter against her chest, rocking back and forth while she sang the most beautiful lullaby Jake had ever heard. It was the same melody they had followed through the mountains, but softer now, more personal. As the Queen sang, something amazing happened. Luna's skin began to glow brighter with each note. The dull, faded appearance she had worn for days was replaced by a radiance that lit up the entire garden. Her breathing became stronger, her color returned, and she opened her eyes to look up at her mother with pure joy. Jake stood there watching, feeling like an intruder in this private moment, but unable to look away. The love between mother and daughter was so powerful he could almost feel it in the air around them. It reminded him of holding his own daughter when she was sick, of how his presence alone seemed to make her feel better, for what felt like ours. Jake remained silent while alien healers came and went, checking on Luna and speaking in hushed, respectful tones. The little girl was clearly getting stronger by the minute, but she refused to let go of her mother's hand. Every few minutes, she would look over at Jake and smile, as if to make sure he was still there. Finally, when Luna had fallen asleep in her mother's arms, Queen Tharmor looked up at Jake. Her eyes were still wet with tears, but now they held something else: wonder, confusion, and slowly, recognition of what he had done for her daughter. She stood carefully, making sure not to wake Luna, and approached Jake, up close. She was even more impressive, radiating a power that had nothing to do with weapons or armies. But when she spoke, her voice was soft and filled with emotion. "The translator tells me you are called Jake," she said, her English heavily accented but clear. "You are the one who found my daughter in the ruins." Jake nodded, not trusting his voice. He still couldn't believe he was having a conversation with the alien queen. 3 days ago, she had been his enemy. Now she was just a grateful mother. "Why?" she asked simply. "Why did you risk everything to bring her home to me? You could have used her as a weapon against me. Your people would have rewarded you greatly for capturing the daughter of their enemy." Jake thought about her question for a long moment. How could he explain to an alien queen that he had a daughter back home who was about Luna's age? How could he tell her that when he looked at Luna, he saw his own child, scared and alone and calling for him because she needed her mom? Jake said finally, and because no child should have to be afraid and alone, no matter what world they come from. Queen Tharmor stared at him for a long time, as if she was trying to see into his soul. Then she did something that shocked Jake completely. She bowed to him, the same deep, respectful bow the guard had given him earlier. "You have shown me something I thought impossible," she said, straightening up. "You have shown me that humans and my people are not so different. We both love our children. We both would do anything to protect them." Luna woke up then and immediately looked around until she spotted Jake. Her face lit up with happiness, and she said something to her mother in their musical language. Queen Tharmor listened, then smiled through her tears. "She says you sang to her when she was frightened," the queen translated. "She says you shared your food when she was hungry and carried her when she could not walk. She calls you her guardian friend." Jake felt his throat tighten with emotion. Luna wiggled out of her mother's arms and ran to him, throwing her small arms around his legs in a hug that nearly knocked him over. She looked up at him with those bright violet eyes and said something that made her mother gasp. "What did she say?" Jake asked. Queen Tharmor's expression was one of amazement mixed with something that might have been hope. "She asked if you could stay with us. She says you are part of our family now." As Jake looked down at Luna's trusting face, then up at her mother's tear-filled eyes, he realized that something had changed forever. Not just for him, but maybe for everyone. This war had started because the species didn't understand each other. But here, in this crystal garden, a human soldier and an alien queen had found something they both understood perfectly. The love of a parent for their child was the same everywhere in the universe. The next morning, Jake woke up in the most comfortable bed he had ever slept in. It wasn't really a bed at all, but some kind of floating platform that adjusted to his body and kept him at the perfect temperature all night. For a moment, he forgot where he was. Then he heard Luna's laughter coming from somewhere nearby, and everything came flooding back. Jake got dressed and followed the sound of Luna's voice through the crystal corridors. He found her in a garden that was even more beautiful than the one where he had met the queen. This one was clearly designed for children, with small streams that glowed different colors and plants that chimed like bells. When the wind touched them, Luna was sitting next to her mother on a bench that seemed to be carved from a single piece of rainbow-colored crystal. They were playing some kind of game that involved creating tiny balls of light in their hands and tossing them back and forth each time Luna caught one. It would explode into sparkles that made her giggle with delight. "Jake," Luna called out when she saw him, switching to the English word she had learned for his name. "Look what Mama taught me." She held up her small hands and concentrated hard. Slowly, a ball of soft blue light formed between her palms. It was shaky and kept flickering. But Luna was so proud of herself that her whole face glowed with happiness. "Queen." Tharmor smiled at Jake as he approached. In the morning light, she looked less like the fearsome alien leader from the wanted posters and more like any mother teaching her child a new skill. She was still wearing her crown of orbiting lights, but she had traded her formal robes for something simpler and more comfortable. "Good morning, Jake," the queen said. "I hope you slept well." Luna insisted on checking on you 3 times during the night to make sure you were comfortable. Jake sat down on the grass near their bench, and Luna immediately abandoned her light ball, game to climb into his lap. It still amazed him how quickly she had recovered. Yesterday she had been dying in his arms, and now she was full of energy and joy. "She's feeling better," Jake said, stating the obvious, but not sure what else to say. "How do you make small talk with an alien queen who was supposed to be your enemy? Much better." Queen Tharmor agreed. "Our healers say she will make a full recovery, but they also say that without your care, she would not have survived another day. You saved her life, Jake. You gave me back my daughter." Jake felt uncomfortable with the praise. Any parent would have done the same thing, would they? The queen asked quietly. Would any of your people have risked their lives to return an enemy child? To her mother, Jake thought about that question. Honestly, he wasn't sure. Most of the soldiers he knew were good people, but they were also trained to see aliens as the enemy. Would they have made the same choice he did? He hoped so. But he couldn't be certain. I keep thinking about how this war started. Queen Tharmor continued, watching Luna chase after a butterfly that looked like it was made of liquid gold. It began with fear and misunderstanding. Your people arrived in our space, and we thought you were invaders. You saw our defensive actions and thought we were attackers. Both sides were just trying to protect what they loved. She paused to help Luna catch the golden butterfly, which dissolved into sparkles when she touched it. Luna clapped her hands in delight and ran off to find another one. But you, the queen said, turning back to Jake, you looked at my daughter and saw not an enemy, but a child who needed help. You saw past our differences to something that connects all living beings: love, compassion, the desire to protect, the innocent. Jake watched Luna playing in the magical garden and felt his heart swell with affection for her. Over the past few days, she had become like a second daughter to him. The thought of anything bad happening to her made him want to fight the entire universe to keep her safe. She's special, Jake said simply. She helped me remember why we fight wars in the first place. It's supposed to be to protect the people we love, not to hurt other people's families. Queen Tharmor was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was filled with something Jake had never expected to hear from an alien leader. Hope. What if we could end this war, Jake? What if we could use what happened here, what you did for Luna, to show both our peoples that peace is possible? Before Jake could answer, Luna came running back with her hands full of the glowing flowers that grew throughout the garden. She climbed back into Jake's lap and started weaving the flowers into a crown, her small fingers working with surprising skill. For you, she said in her careful English, placing the flower crown on Jake's head. King of kindness. Jake laughed despite the serious conversation he had been having with her mother. The flower crown was probably ridiculous looking, but Luna was so proud of her gift that he wouldn't take it off for anything. Thank you, princess, he said, and Luna beamed at the title. Queen Tharmor watched this interaction with tears in her eyes. Do you see what I mean? She whispered. This is what the universe could look like if we chose love over fear. If we chose to protect each other's children instead of fighting each other. As if summoned by her mother's words, Luna looked up at both adults with those wise violet eyes that seemed to see straight into their souls. No more sad? She asked in her mix of alien and English words. No more fighting. Only family now. Jake felt tears running down his cheeks as he hugged Luna close. This little girl, who had lost everything in a war she didn't understand, still believed that love could fix the world. Maybe she was right. Maybe it was that simple. Only family now, he promised her, and meant it with every fiber of his being. Queen Tharmor reached over and took Jake's hand in hers. Her skin was warm and surprisingly human-like, and her grip was strong with determination. Then let us build a new world, she said. One where no child, human or alien, ever has to cry for their mother in the ruins of war. One where kindness is stronger than fear. As the 3 moons of the alien world rose over the Crystal Palace, Jake sat in a garden of impossible beauty with an alien queen and a little girl who had taught him that love really could conquer anything. He thought about his own daughter, back on Earth, and how proud she would be to know that her daddy had helped end a war by simply doing what any good parent would do. He had brought a lost child home to her mother, and in doing so, he had brought hope home to the entire universe.